Right. What happens now between last week's budget and, of course, the return of Parliament for 2 weeks? House sits for 2 weeks, and then you have 2 weeks of budget Senate estimates. That's looming. This week, everyone's on the road. This is the big week that the opposition and the government plan to hit the road and convince you their budget's good, and the opposition leader says, no, it's not. My plan is better. Early election, potentially. That means they're out there pretty hard today. And the polls, 3 out. Not great news for Labor. Certainly not in the detail on the budget, but I've got to be honest, plenty of work for the coalition to do too. Let's pull it all apart. National editor at the Australian, Dennis Shanahan. Well, I just said at the top of the show, Dennis, I mean, clearly now I feel like there's a sense, I'm sure you can agree here, that we've got some line and length from both sides. You know, we see these battle lines for the election. We know certainly there's going to be a fight about housing. Immigration from the opposition leader absolutely squarely on the table. The Treasurer today still pushing his line, though, that his budget spend will not be inflationary. Now, the experts disagree. And in most of the polls out today, when they ask the specific, are you worried about your rates? Are you concerned about inflation? Voters are not with the Treasurer here. The Australian Financial Review, we'd had a poll out saying voters fear a budget will raise rates. A similar sort of number there, 40% I think it was in that case, in your poll, in News Poll. I'll get into the guts of News Poll in a moment, but housing and immigration, Dennis, do you think that is the two big battle line issues?
Oh, certainly. Housing and immigration have become welded together. They are now the one topic, and Peter Dutton's done quite a good job in making them one topic because they are actually the symptoms of the greater problems of cost of living. And cost of living is also driven by energy. And so what Peter Dutton has done, he has made immigration, housing interchangeable as major problems on the back of a cost of living crisis and concerns about the price of energy. These are the 4 topics we are going to see all the way through to the election and at the election. The opposition is trying to look at the longer term, and as you mentioned, the Fin Review poll, the Freshwater poll, what people are looking at is the longer term. They are no longer just accepting the short-term giveaways, and they are asking the harder questions about long-term economic policy, and housing and immigration are at the heart of that.
Yeah, I think you're right to say that they are looking much further out. We saw this consistently across those 3 polls, Dennis. And I think the voter is quite shrewd here. Of course, they're going to put the money in their pocket. They're doing it tough, although those energy rebates go to the energy company, not to individuals. But they're worried about rates. They're worried about talk. There might be a rise now, not the cuts they thought were coming. They're worried about inflation. They get inflation. You know, a lot of people in Canberra don't think ordinary people out there get something like inflation. They do. They feel it, but they understand how much it's hurting them longer term. In your News Poll today, there was a small uptick for the government. It's still behind the coalition in primary vote terms. But this is interesting. 27% only of people thought the budget was good for the economy. Now, that is the lowest on record since News Poll asked the question in 1999. We're talking back there, the GST election. That's got to be sobering for Labor.
Oh, indeed. And Peter, I've been at the Australian for all of those news polls on the budget since 1999. And what is remarkable, I have great faith in the Australian electorate. I think it is politically savvy, and I think it is more economically numerate than a lot of populations around the world, partly because I think of compulsory voting. But that aside, the public is alert to what is happening in the broader economy. And in the past, they have actually rewarded treasurers, and I'm thinking here of Peter Costello, for taking tough action at a budget, even when they say they are going to be worse off as a budget. Now, this budget was designed to make people better off and claim to be deflationary and good for the economy. Well, that poll today shows that people aren't buying it. The Freshwater poll as well, people don't believe it's going to achieve the objects that the Treasurer set out, and they are still fearful of interest rate rises and continuing inflation. I don't think the budget line has worked so far for the Australian population.
I think alongside compulsory voting too, Dennis, Australia's got one of the highest ratios of shareholder in the world. I mean, most of that's obviously through our superannuation funds, but people are engaged in the markets, they're watching the economy. Our news is at night. They run a share market update. They run through the markets, they run through the Aussie dollar and how we're pegging overseas. You watch news programs internationally, they don't have that financial data in the news broadcast. So I think that's where we've got such an informed Australian electorate. You're spot on. Canberra doesn't think that. You and I know. We know the people out there are smarter than Canberra thinks they are. The other poll, I said there were three. This is the third one. Resolve Political Monitor. It shows that a big cut to immigration is well supported by voters. 66%, two-thirds saying last year's intake was too high. Here's the Treasurer again on the defensive today.
The budget will put downward pressure on inflation, not upward pressure on inflation. The way that we are managing the budget and the economy responsibly, combined with the way that we've designed our cost of living help, will be part of the solution to our inflation challenge, not part of the problem.
And this is the problem. Labor's wedged itself on Big Australia. They love Big Australia. They hope all these migrants will eventually vote for Labor, but they've needed big migration numbers to basically stave off a recession, and now they're caught here.
Well, indeed. And look, it's not just Labor. Labor has pushed it high. There's no doubt about it. And we've seen record levels now. But over the decades, governments have relied on high immigration just to artificially push the economy along. Well, it's got to the stage where it's not working anymore. There are too many people, and even the Treasurer has admitted that there is a housing crisis. Labor's policy is now to drastically cut immigration. So how is it that Labor can say, yes, we are trying to cut immigration, we have to do that, and then, if the Leader of the Opposition says he's going to do it, it's bad for the economy? Jim Chalmers is caught between a rock and a hard place here. He's trying to argue for lower immigration because that's what the majority, 66%, want. Labor is seen to have introduced and has introduced record high levels of immigration since COVID, and now they are trying to argue that further cuts from the Leader of the Opposition would actually hurt the economy. They can't have it both ways, and what Australia needs is a controlled and planned immigration policy in accordance with what is happening with the economy.
I say this again, I've been talking about immigration now for about 5 years. We have a plan for everything in government. Most departments have a big strategic agenda. The only plan we do not have as a country is a fair income population plan. And the fact that we don't, the fact that the politicians on the left and the right do not want it written down, do not want it debated, means it's all about the economics. It's about this fakery in the budget, Dennis. And I think Australians are actually calling them out over this. Assistant Minister for the Republic, it looks like he's going to go to God. Well, not the MP. He'll stay on likely in the front bench. He's got some other bits to his portfolio. But the talk is the Prime Minister's going to dump this Republic title on his front bench. And, of course, heightened speculation today of a mid-year reshuffle. Well, I think that's right. They've got to dump that title out of that area. And they've also got to dump some of their underperformers. I mean, I cannot believe they can go to an election with Claire O'Neill and Andrew Giles in those particular immigration portfolios. I think there'd be a massive campaign liability, both of them. Do you think we're going to have a reshuffle over the break?
Well, just on the point about the Republican assistant minister, that's pretty small beer in the broader picture. Anthony Albanese has made it clear, even today, that he's not going to embark on any more referendums. The last thing he wants to do about that terrible mistake he made about promising to hold a referendum on the Indigenous voice to Parliament is have another referendum, and so that's out of the question. And I think that the much larger question is about a reshuffle, not just on the front bench of the government, but on the front bench of the opposition. And I think that the government certainly needs to dump some of these underperformers. Once we get past some of the immigration issues, we need to see a big shake-up in immigration and home affairs. They have been a complete failure for the entire period of the Albanese government. That's just the start. I think that Jim Chalmers is obviously doing the best he can, but I think that at the same time, Peter Dutton needs to look at firing up some and promoting some of the younger, more junior people he has in positions, because I think some of the senior team are not cutting through. And, you know, when push comes to shove, we're going to have an election in the next 12 months and people will be looking for an credible alternative, not just Prime Minister, but team. And Peter Dutton can't do it all on his own, and nor can Anthony Albanese.
I have to say I agree with you on the coalition as much as I agree with you on Labor. I think Dutton's got some dead wood. I think he's got some lazy buggers in there that he needs to send back to the back of the back bench to wake them up a bit and put some young and hungry ones out there at the front, because it does look like he really is the tent pole there for the opposition. There's not a spread of effort as there should be when they're this promising in the polls. I wrote about this yesterday. We'll finish here if we can, Dennis. The judgment of the PM in his office. I wrote about this yesterday. This is the decision by the Prime Minister to evict his tenant. It got a huge reaction in the paper. I mean, he's got 4 homes to live in, 2, of course, that we pay for. The bloke he's kicking out, well, he's just got 1 home. He'll be kicked out and into the rental market in the middle of a housing crisis. Absolutely, he's got the right to decide who lives in his house, right? That's the gift of any landlord. But you've got to question the political judgment of the PM at this time, don't you?
Well, I think you're being a bit harsh and a little bit unfair there, Peter. Prime Ministers can't win on this.
In what way?
The only thing they can do... Well, because if they are elected and they keep the investments they have, they keep shares they have, even if they put them in a trust like Malcolm Turnbull did, there's always a problem with what they've got. John Howard decided to get rid of all his shares when he became Prime Minister, and it was the only way to do it. And I think Anthony Albanese hasn't evicted his tenant. He's selling his house. And good on somebody from the Housing Commission who has an investment property. Good on him. Well done. And I think that he has handled it poorly. That's not entirely his fault. I don't think his office had anything to do really with what he was doing. It's always a bad look and it's always hard. Kevin Rudd's wife had to try and divest herself of her very, interesting business, a very vigorous business. And so I think
Come on, Dennis, I can't disagree with you here.
No.
I can't agree with you. I can't agree with you here. We're in the middle of a housing crisis. His office does know. His office would be involved in the decision because they have to update the ministerial entitlement, so it is a discussion internally. But the third point I'd make, John Howard in the end didn't rent out his home in Wollstonecroft Croft because it was just not worth the political headache. And Abbott never rented out his family home. I mean, he always said, if I'm living in a house courtesy of the taxpayer, I look like I'm greedy if I rent out my private home at the same time. Why does the Prime Minister, given he's got 2 homes, it's a housing crisis, he was a single man, it's not like he's going to sell this house and he and Jodie are going to move into it or any of these properties while he's got the lodge in Kirribilli. I just think it's an own goal at a time when he's on the back foot over housing.
Well, I disagree with you, Peter. I think that he didn't have any choice. Yes, the headlines haven't been good. He actually persevered with a lower rent during the COVID pandemic. He was a good landlord. He wants to sell the house. OK, and, let's move on from it. He's got to do it.
All right.
And I think that, yes, he would have told the office and he's got to do the registration. I understand all of that, but I'm sure that he didn't go into his office and ask them whether he should sell his house or not. So, yes, we can agree to disagree on that, Peter, but I don't think that PMs
We're allowed to
of
disagree.
any flavour can win on this issue?
I like a bit of civil disagreement, Dennis Shanahan, on this program. You'll stay on the PM's Christmas card list, and I suspect I'm off it, but I think I was off it anyway. Good to see you, Dennis. We'll see you next week.